Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Pecorella, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with the Institute for Public Health Innovation. Welcome to our second session of the ECHO series. Today's session is how to humanize the narrative, best practices for telling the whole story. I will first start with a few accessibility and technical support reminders. This training is recorded and will include ASL interpretation on screen and closed captions. Our ASL interpreters today are Jill and Daniel, and they are already spotlighted for you. A huge thank you to our interpreters and AI Media for today's interpretation and closed captioning. Now I would like to introduce Marianne McNair. Marianne has been facilitating story-based workshops at Story Center for over 15 years. Most of her work has centered on public health, higher education, and cultural organizations, and frequently focuses on the theme of social justice. She often works directly with marginalized populations and people working with others experiencing socioeconomic disparities and inequities to create stories and an effect to collect qualitative data and affect change. She has also worked extensively with public health departments and employees, telling their own stories about their jobs as forensic nurses, social workers, doctors, and policy advocates. Marianne spent many years as a museum educator at History Colorado before joining Story Center's Denver office in 2008. She holds degrees in history and anthropology. Later on in the session, we will hear from Rocky Lane. Rocky Lane is a Black man of trans experience, content creator, community leader, and advocate based in Austin, Texas. His leadership and consulting work is varied and informed by over 6 years of navigating transition and 20 years of medical experience in pre-hospital and clinical care. He is the former board chair for TENT, which is Transgender Education Network of Texas, and is currently focused on Central Texas region community care and building stability and power through safety net services and team building. He envisions a future world with a thriving trans community without the risk of state-sanctioned violence. Thank you both, and I'll turn it over to you, Marianne.
Thank you. I'm happy to be with you today. I am Marianne McNair, and I work for History Colorado, as was indicated. And I'm going to go ahead and share my slides with you. So I want to go over today who we are at Story Center, just who this organization is, what digital storytelling is from our perspective, and impacts of storytelling in public health. I'll also talk a little bit about an overview and the expectations of a project called Growing Resilience. And we'll watch a couple of digital stories, and we'll talk about the outcomes of that Growing Resilience project. And then I'll just have a little bit of information on links and resources at the very end after we have questions. So the Story Center background is that we started in the Bay Area around 1993. We started as actually a theater company, and the theater highlighted first-person stories on stage. And at a certain point, when video editing software was available on personal computers, we transitioned to helping people create their own stories in their own words using technology on their own computers. So we facilitated those processes and came up with what we called digital storytelling. We believe we coined the phrase, and today there are all sorts of different versions of what digital storytelling is, but what I'll be talking about today is the methodology that we developed. We have a long history of working with community-based and institutional partners across the world in all sorts of projects. And when we're talking about public health, we're talking about all sorts of things from sexual assault and violence against women in India, Africa, Tajikistan, the United States, South American countries. And we're talking also about working with people around gender issues, HIV, the use of PrEP to prevent HIV, Hep B, Hep C, all sorts of issues around public health. we are also accessible to individuals at all levels of experience as storytellers, as video editors, and with all kinds of tech or lack of tech experience. We're very adept at working with people at all levels of experience. So what are digital stories? For us, they're very short first-person narratives. And by short, I mean about 3 to 4 minutes long. And these are stories that people put together using their own words, their own images, or images that they draw, or video clips that they take themselves. So they aren't using Google images or anything that they pull offline. It's using their own media most of the time. They sound very personal, as if the person is talking to you as the listener over a cup of coffee at a coffee house. So they're very personal. They evoke empathy and connection with an audience. So they combine both the head and the heart when people are telling their stories. And because they do that, they don't sound academic or scholarly, and they use everyday words. They absolutely do not sound written. They can be a snapshot of experiences or moments that led to change. And some of the most powerful stories do revolve around change or personal growth. They're often about a lesson learned. They're full of details that help set the scene. And they show some sort of insight or reason to be told. So we often ask the storyteller, what does this story actually boil down to? What is it you're trying to have your audience understand? And also there's methods for generating qualitative data for researchers, and they can be shared if and when the storyteller is willing to do so. Our ethical practice in terms of what we do with digital storytelling is that sharing that story and the desire to do that belongs solely in the hands of the storyteller and not in the entity that is having the story being made. So when we talk about the impacts of digital storytelling, especially in terms of public health, it's really important to know that change is an inevitable part of being human, but we often lack the ability to come together to tell these stories, even to ourselves, much less to a group of people. So sometimes, I think most of the time, we walk around with the stories that impacted us the most, but we don't articulate them outside of our consciousness. And in doing that, we kind of hone what the stories are and what they mean. At Story Center, we offer a safe and supportive environment so that participants of all ages and from all walks of life can explore their histories and reflect on how they got to where they are. When they tell their stories, workshop participants connect deeply with themselves and with other people, and they access a renewed sense of hope for the future and develop valuable skills for community and institutional leadership. When we talk about education and awareness, personal stories are immensely useful tools for learning, and we work closely with workshop participants to ensure that the social and political determinants of individual experience are brought out in their stories. Facts and timelines and third-person perspectives by experts can be useful in describing an issue or problem, but personal stories, when properly contextualized, can bring to life the realities of how individuals experience that issue or problem day to day. When people see and hear a story that addresses silenced or stigmatized topics, their conception of what can and can't be said or done shifts. And this is where behavior and social norms begin to change as well. We talk about how that also leads to movement building, because collective action begins with individual action as people make connections between their own lives and the lives of other people. As workshop participants allow themselves to be vulnerable in sharing their own stories, they gain insight into perspectives and emotions that they may not previously have considered or felt. This builds solidarity within and across groups and encourages civic engagement. Once stories are completed, the audiences that watch them have the chance to consider how they may be affected by or implicated in a particular issue. With careful facilitation, community story screenings can generate deep and strategic discussion and function as opportunities to map out strategies for how audience members can take action on important issues. This work can be supported by sharing stories online and via social media methods or broadcasting them on local radio to reinforce what people have seen and heard at screening events. This, of course, then leads to the ability to have policy advocacy and bring people together in groups to talk about what needs to be changed and what hasn't been changed in the community. Stories can function as key components of that awareness raising and institutional capacity building efforts to support reasonable implementation of policies that may have already been adopted. This also leads to research and evaluation, whether in an academic or community context. Our story work methods can be used to assess and document local needs and problems, and to evaluate whether or not these needs and problems are being addressed by existing programs and services. We've collaborated with partners on workshops that are framed as a form of community-based participatory research or engaged research to support the gathering of qualitative evidence about issues or concerns of local strength and capacities that are being overlooked. Our academic partners are looking into how this best evaluates the impact of storytelling workshops and story screening events on storytellers and audiences. In our methodology, in both academic and community contexts, our story work methods can be used to assess and document local needs and problems, evaluate whether or not these needs and problems are being addressed by existing programs and services, engage in community-based participatory research to support the gathering of qualitative evidence about issues of concern or local strengths and capacities that are being overlooked, can gather stories that document the unfolding of projects and provide a reflective space where people can discuss what is working and what might need to be done differently in communities. Today, I want to talk a little bit about this Growing Resilience program case that I was a part of over the last 5 or 6 years. The Growing Resilience came out of, it was a community-based research project to bring home gardens to nearly 100 families on the Wind River Indian Reservation in Fremont County, Wyoming. It was a partnership among several groups that you can see here on the screen. The goals were to bring people together to measure their health before they started the Growing Resilience project and before they had the gardens in their homes, and then to measure the health impacts of gardening on the participants. It was to serve as a family-based health intervention to reduce disparities suffered by Native Americans in nearly every measure of health. At Wind River, the area is considered a food desert. And so it was hoped that the gardening project would increase access to fresh fruits and vegetables and lead to changes in health outcomes. These health outcomes were measured very carefully twice a year for 2 years. People would come in and have all of these metrics measured, their BMI, their waist circumference, blood pressure, hand strength, all of these other measures that were taken that you can see here on the screen. And again, they were done twice a year for 2 years with all of these people. I want to show a digital story made by one of the participants, Dave Myers, who is the director of Shoshone Tribal Health. So let's watch this story by Dave Myers. Excuse me, I wanted to put the closed captioning on, so let me start this again.
I'm not 50 yet. and of my group of about 12 close friends growing up, only 3 of us are still alive. I've always known that health and well-being are important, and when I stepped into the gardens of the Growing Resilience participants, I saw families working together, taking pride in their work. I started my own garden, and with the help of Hazen, my granddaughter with the green thumb, we've grown more than we can eat. Like the other gardeners, we fought grasshoppers and had our failures, but we've stuck with it. Sharing those problems brings the community together. It was my wife who saved me. She put her foot down. She saw the man she married spiraling out of control, no ambition, and no future. She asked me to think about what I wanted for our children. I've done a lot of work on myself over the years, studied Native history and culture, and traced the sources of historical trauma of my community. I understand how many of our elders returned from years of assimilation in boarding schools with different kinds of learning. But without being raised by their own parents, knowing how to nurture their children wasn't easy. Something was missing, and I understand those sacrifices that were made. Today I'm the director of Shoshone Tribal Health, and Growing Resilience has helped me connect with my community and my family. This may sound funny, but nurturing the plants in my garden has helped me grow as a man, a husband, and a father. Someday, when my own children are at the age I am now, I hope the numbers have changed. I hope that more than a quarter of the people in their circle of friends will still be around, healthy.
So um, the results of the Growing Resilience Project were very different from the anticipated results. The project directors began measuring the health impacts in 2016, and there were no measurable improvements in weight or vital signs among the participants. There was no survey, blood markers, or a scale that could capture what growing meant to many of the gardening families, though. Only stories could. And these are some of the unexpected outcomes. What I heard time and time again from the participants was that they didn't understand that this was going to happen, but the families spent more time together by working on their gardens. The kids put their screens down. I can't tell you how many families said it was the first time I could get my kid off their phone or off their tablet. It brought them outside, and children, adults acquired a sense of responsibility in maintaining the health of the plants in their gardens. So they worked together on life, which was interesting. They shared memories of elders who had also had gardening in their past, and they talked about the wisdom that those elders imparted to them, the older people, to their children. We're in a position to pass down that information that the elders passed to them. Many of the families are still gardening today, and happily so. In a better way to talk about the impact of digital storytelling in qualitative data gathering is to show this story by Alyssa Wechsler-Duba, who worked on the project. And she really says it in a wonderful way in this story. So let's watch this story together.
It was my first day managing the survey and analysis department's call center at the university. we dialed random phone numbers and asked people to participate in a research survey. My training taught me to be professional and concise, and part of my job was to listen in on employees' calls and give feedback. My talking points? Be polite. Cut short answers that aren't in the pre-selected multiple choice responses. Be objective. I sat through one employee's 30-minute call where she empathized with the participants' struggle to quit tobacco. Afterward, I reminded her that the survey was designed to take 7 to 10 minutes, and I suggested that her approach could negatively influence the survey's outcomes. Eventually, I became the project and data collection manager for Growing Resilience. I loved this community-based participatory research project, which helped community leaders provide and support home gardens at the Wind River Indian Reservation. It was an outstanding example of how to do research collaboratively and well. We tried to engage and honor participants, listening deeply, making changes to the research where we could, providing meals, helping with childcare, paying for time and travel, and sharing experiences through storytelling. Even the surveys we used accounted for different ways of sharing, allowing participants to complete them electronically, on paper, or read aloud by a researcher. Talking to colleagues about other projects, I learned just how cutting-edge these small acts of humanity were within the research world. At one data collection session, I sat down with a participant who wanted to do her survey verbally. I asked, "About how many hours per week do you think you spent in your garden? 0, 1 to 3 hours, 4 to 7, or more than 1 hour per day?" She started telling me about how, at first, she spent a lot of time in the garden, but then her daughter got sick. I said, "The amount of time may have changed over the year, but on average, about how much time per week do you think you spent in the garden?" She continued to tell me about her daughter's illness and how it didn't leave any time to be in the garden. I was getting ready to try to prompt again, and she said, "And then my daughter passed away." I froze, staring at the survey. Then I looked into her eyes. We had an obligation to the study and to our funders. Eventually, I asked the next question, something about how many vegetables she ate. I got the numbers I needed that day, but her story still echoes in my heart.
And so key questions about digital storytelling and how storytelling can play a role in qualitative data gathering. The first question, how can storytelling address the limitations of biometric and blood-based outcome measures in capturing the unique health challenges faced by marginalized communities?
Excuse me, Marianne, can
Yeah.
you pause quickly?
Yes.
Okay, if you don't mind, can we pause? I'm gonna pause recording too. And then just go back to the key questions when we resume recording.
Are you guys going to ask me the key questions or should I?
I can.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, you can hear me? So thank you, Marianne, for that insightful presentation. We now will ask Rocky to join us so we can have a conversation about our case study. So thank you, Rocky, for jumping back in. So we know marginalized communities experience health inequities due to historic and ongoing poverty, structural oppression, and discrimination. These forces impact health through unequal distribution of social determinants of health, systemic barriers, and underrepresentation in health data. We also know that biometric and blood-based outcome measures may not accurately capture their holistic health experiences. So our first question for you both is, how can storytelling address the limitations of biometric and blood-based outcome measures in capturing those unique health challenges faced by marginalized communities? And I open it up to both of you.
Rocky, would you like to take this?
I certainly do have some notes on this that I'd love to share, and thank you for giving me the space. What came to mind, even watching this presentation, is understanding the value of a really good story, and I love listening to people talk about how they were compensated or otherwise cared for in the collection of these stories, and the places where they kind of missed the mark of deeply valuing stories. I personally have been a storyteller my entire life, and I feel like this can be brought out of a lot of people in a very natural way. And I just wanted to highlight a few things that I thought were so important that this project did, and even projects that I have participated in have done pretty well, that I think grab a really, really good, valuable story, and kind of supersede this idea that we're trying to only collect data, just go way beyond that and really dive deeply. And I think it kind of came down for me in my consulting on these projects to say that in order to capture a super genuine experience, we needed to deeply listen to these stories. And I think that last story really illustrates why that's so important. Not only deeply listening, but like communicating that we are deeply listening, and mirroring back or responding back to these stories in real ways. And one of the ways that we kind of did this was we changed who the storyteller was talking to. And for me, I think that was a super important piece to change the dynamic between the research and the people's stories that we were bringing in. Another thing I'd like to add is that the stories can contain this deep emotion and context that enhances the overall impact, mostly because some of these stories are deeply shocking. I think we can I certainly felt the emotion of the last story the most. And when we are dealing in these communities that are traumatized, dealing with generational trauma, dealing with violence, I think it is especially important to allow that emotion to be present in all its forms. Sometimes it looks like anger, even at the organization itself or the project itself, but it is deeply valuable and holds so much more context. And I think a fuller story can be captured than just numbers. Biometrics can be off-putting for folks. Clinical settings, medical trauma, things like that can be off-putting. And leading in storytelling can often open up the conversation to get deeper data collection. And my last point is that it's super important in the storytelling process that there is an element of trust building. And I've noticed in some of the projects I consult on that there hasn't been that pre-work done to create the trust, and also maybe even put someone in a position that is already trusted to kind of make the wheels turn a bit better. And that's I'm happy to expand on this further, but I think that those are the main points I'd like to interject that I saw in this presentation that I think were done beautifully, and I also think work beautifully. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. I'd like to respond to some of what you just said, and I think that trust building is the key to all of this, and creating a safe space where people can not only tell their stories to themselves and to each other, but to really crystallize for themselves the deeper meaning of the stories. Oftentimes, people come into these workshop spaces, which, by the way, are no more than 10 people at a time. So it's a small group that we bring together to really deeply listen to each other and ask questions of each other. Everybody comes in on that same level of actually kind of a terror of having to tell something personal about themselves and create something out of that, a project out of that. And as they go and as we proceed through the workshop, the walls between people melt down. And what happens is people see themselves in other people's stories. And I think that that's true, even if it's not the same lived experience, because we are emotional beings and we relate on this emotional plane. And so when we're talking about intellectual content, if it's not blended with emotion, then it really just stands apart and doesn't really mean as much as it needs to mean. So bringing people together in these small groups where the information that takes place in that room, in that space, stays in that space. It's like Vegas, it stays in that space. And it kind of just evokes trust. And when you're bringing in people, for instance, to tell stories from the same community, whether it's people who are HIV positive or people in the Wind River Reservation or whatever the group is, there's already a built-in understanding or a shared experience that they bring in. So there's already some level of shared experience that brings people together. And so oftentimes having the qualitative data can be very important. It's sort of like the difference to me between creating a documentary and having digital stories. The digital stories are from the heart, personal experiences, and they say, this is what it was like for me on the ground. I don't know what it was like to Sarah across the room or for Joe, but for me, this is what it was, and this is what I lived through or experienced. And it's as if somebody is leaning forward and talking directly to you. So these digital stories, I think, pack a punch in that they add so much to the qualitative data. And in this case, and in other cases as well, people go in perhaps in these studies with an outcome in mind that they're really hopeful to get. For instance, I'm just going to bring up quickly another project that was working with Puerto Rican young women trying to figure out why they got pregnant at such a young age, and trying to reverse that by getting their stories and saying, okay, these are things we can work on to prevent these teen pregnancies. At the end of the workshop, what they found was these teen mothers got it together once they became mothers. Before that, they were runaways. They often abused substances. They had all sorts of issues that then were addressed when they got pregnant. They would say, oh, I have something to live for and something to model for this unborn child. And their lives turned a corner when they got pregnant. And so this intention of preventing these teen pregnancies was sort of blown out of the water at that point. Like, why is that your goal? And why is that your goal and not the community goal? What is the community looking for, right? And so coming up with those things is I think, what is so important, and digital stories can help get at the crux of these issues. And I don't want to just keep rambling on about these things if more specific questions should be addressed.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think you both brought up such amazing points too, because when I was watching those stories, what I thought too was, wow, instead of looking at data of health outcomes or even, maps of food access, the impact of the emotion of those stories tells a story of what dealing with a lifetime of that structural oppression and the weathering on the body, and it really comes across in those. And since you brought up digital storytelling, I will quickly jump to the third question. We'll get back to the second one. But specifically with digital storytelling platforms, I know we talked about how it could drive different goals, different health outcome changes, but how do you think sharing the experiences through those digital storytelling platforms can create awareness and drive positive change in health outcomes once the desired health outcomes are identified?
I'll ask Rocky what they think too, but I just also wanted to say that in this particular case, the gardening project snowballed. And so once people saw the stories, not only did they think they could also garden, but they thought, I have a story like that. I could tell my story too. And so the entire project snowballed, and that actually led to other projects in terms of Native American food sustainability nationwide. And so that's one way. And Rocky, did you have an answer for that as well?
Yeah, largely, I just wanted to say that I think that digital storytelling is a well-proven like concept when we talk about social media specifically. And I think that I use that as the kind of ultimate example of how we've seen, I think, a true a snowball effect is right. I think it is in every community we can find a map of how digital stories are archiving, preserving these very important aspects of the change or the narrative or the community mindedness discussion that people want. And I think that we're seeing people take this up at a younger and younger age as a result of some social platforms. For me, it was YouTube. For some people now, it's things like TikTok. And I think it's just super interesting that this discussion around digital storytelling is connecting to data in a really interesting way, but that it is creating these I can't even like, my brain fills with the examples of what has been created simply by people connecting through stories online. Like, I've seen people raise $2.2 million for trans healthcare as a result of somebody posting a 30-second video on one side of the world and a 30-second video on the other side of the world, and that collaboration happening so naturally as if they were in the same room and they were in the same community, and it's happening faster and faster. And I just think that everything that we're outlining here kind of applies to what we're seeing in that realm. And I just also wanted to say that like the minimizing the middle person, like the idea, that's what social media kind of does. It puts us automatically in a safe space where we control the tech, where we can change our backgrounds and change our avatar or change our look, and just share in this really open format, and other people are sharing, and it has been the most incredible thing, I think, in our lifetime, to see how this has developed into changing people's lives. People can raise money on a dime or really quickly. It's just been I personally think it has just been the secret weapon for our research projects to really dive into those personalities, those people that are out there sharing and encouraging other people to do that. And that's just like what this brings up for me.
A great point. And a lot of our workshops now, that since the pandemic, a lot of our workshops are online, and we can bring people together from different countries all over the world. So it can be around a certain topic. It could be language revitalization. It could be a public health issue, but we can bring people in from India and Africa and England and the United States, and all come together and really bridge the boundaries that were so firmly in place before and talk about our commonality, our human commonalities. And I think that is so impactful. So thank you for bringing that up. I love that. But I also wanted to say that oftentimes we have facilitated discussions where we will get in an auditorium, for instance, or even online, and talk about an issue in general terms, and then bring the digital stories in. In Colorado, where I live, I've had some workshops around the use of PrEP for HIV prophylactic, and people told their stories, and then we rent a movie theater and bring the storytellers in, screen the stories on the big screen. We've had full houses, like 250 people. We screened the stories, and then the storytellers who would like to sit on the stage afterwards and take questions from the audience. When that happens, it's magic in the room. It is magic. And the dissemination of knowledge and personal experience is palpably powerful. I just can't say it in a better way. It's just an amazing thing. We actually did a workshop with transgender people talking about healthcare and their experiences in healthcare. And we did the similar thing where we took those stories to University of Colorado Health and Denver Health and presented the stories and had a talk back with the storytellers. And our goal was to change the way trans people are treated in the healthcare system. Doctors came, staff who create the check-in process came, and they were in tears and saying, we get it. We're going to start changing the way we call people out when they come into their appointments. We're not going to call them anymore by their given name, but by their chosen name. They understood. And so it was only through these digital stories that we could actually get them to make these changes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, can I just, one more thing?
Please do.
I just wanted to say, I think that is a brilliant example of, you had a slide a little bit back that was showing the path from storytelling, I think, to change, I think was kind of the concept, right? And for me, the trans community, the gender expansive like portion that was kind of like echo, but it was also, it's just been happening in these pockets and then being delivered to the medical teams, I think is a great example. Like, I think we're probably somewhere in policy change in your chart, you know, on that particular example. But I think that is a brilliant example of how we kind of harness the power of that community story, of gender diverse experience, of trans experience, and how it has single-handedly changed the way that our people in our medical teams have started to behave in the clinical setting. It is after seeing decades of the trans community trying to break through in this way, seeing it actually connect at these larger entities has just been, I think that's a brilliant example of that process. And I just wanted to name that. I love that example.
Thank you. And we need to continue that. We can't just have one-offs, you know, we need to continue doing that so that new medical teams are aware of this as well.
Thank you for that addition. You guys have already given so many great insights for question number 2. You've given a lot of really specific examples, but I wanted to open it up to you. Are there any other from the list, either that's there for food insecurity, mental and physical wellness, medication and supplement usage within communities, or anything that you want to add, a specific example of how storytelling can provide insights into those areas within communities? Anything else? I would love to hear. I'm sure everyone else would.
Rocky, anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of inspired one really big thing in me that I think is super important to mention, which is there is no limitations on how this can be applied. And one place that I see, for instance, that we have not applied it, but it is right in front of us, is that trans people's echo revealed that we have problems with housing, healthcare or care access, and employment. Housing being the biggest stability factor for many, many people across the globe. And we also have digital storytelling that has been around for a really long time in the form of quote unquote reality shows. And now I'm not saying that we need to make reality shows that are specifically designed to tell trans stories or stories that are underserved. But I am saying that applying the concept that a storytelling or media house or a storytelling opportunity where there's access to tech and it's in a home is one of those ways that we can think way outside of the box and start to create pathways that otherwise, if not through the arts, through the power of things like digital creation, we could probably bridge a gap that has just not been happening. And like I've seen it happen for food insecurity and other things where people build gardens or they do other programming, but I have yet to see it actually try to take on something huge. And I just think that kind of the pieces always exist right in front of us, but we just haven't figured out how to like write that into a place. And it just brought it up for me that like we could take this so much farther, and that's kind of my insight on that.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work we do with within systems that are very, very a lot of our social work and systems that are funded by government, I think oftentimes, whether it's local or federal, are often very static and being flexible or malleable in the way we approach things can be hard. And so I remember doing a workshop last year with the National Center for Healthy Housing that was dealing with lead-based paint in communities on the East Coast. And it was very interesting. The participants created stories that were brilliant. They wanted to share the stories, but they had to get permission from their employers to share the stories. And some of the employers said no, that they didn't want to share those stories within the community. I find that in itself really interesting. And I feel like with digital storytelling, the goal for me is to spread lived experience knowledge and to spread what people know, what they see, what they feel, and that there shouldn't be limitations on that. But I think some of the structures we have in place are set in stone, and pushing those boundaries a little bit can be really hard. So I do think that there is so much value to be gained by listening to these stories and really understanding what people are expressing. It's hard sometimes as a facilitator not to get almost a secondary trauma from listening to some of these stories. Because they're deep, they're hard stories, a lot of them. And so the correct people need to hear the stories. The people who are change makers need to hear the stories. Oftentimes we suggest that the people having these workshops or holding the workshops invite some of those change makers to participate in the digital storytelling workshop so that they're put in the same position as the people making the stories, and so that they can hear them firsthand as they're being made and developed. I do think that that's important, and that does help push those boundaries out a little bit. So that's one of the goals, I think, is to bring those change makers into the room as the stories are being made so that they can participate on that equal playing field.
Thank you. I think you both sort of already did a great job of answering the last question of what are the potential consequences of overlooking storytelling narratives. I do want to open it up to see if you have anything to add to that, but I also would love to expand because you both had mentioned, obviously, building trust is so important. And that can be challenging. And I'm wondering if, in answering that last question, if you also wanted to add in, what are other challenges to consider when thinking about digital storytelling or storytelling in general?
Well, challenges from my perspective of working with people in these workshops are helping people really understand for themselves why their stories matter and what they are actually about at the heart of them. We carry these experiences we've had around with us, but we don't always put the pieces together for ourselves to know why those things are important or what they ultimately mean. So helping people get to that point where they can transition from their experiences to the depth of meaning behind it and what it is they want their audience to know can be a hurdle. Once people get there, and then once they start building their actual digital story and working in the software, I think it becomes more and more important to them, the story they're telling, and they have more invested in what it is they're trying to say. Overlooking those narratives, I think, keeps us very siloed, and it makes us feel like we are the experts in a field where we are not the experts. I came from a field originally where I worked at a history museum and I told other people's stories. I told people what it was like to be a Ute Indian. I told people what it was like to be a fur trader in 1820. I told people what it was like to live in a sod house. I told people what it was like to do all of these things. And here I am, I'm not any of those things. And once I invited Story Center in to help me with my work and to invite people in to tell their own stories about being perhaps an Italian of Italian heritage in Denver, or growing up in a particular neighborhood. And their stories were impactful. I worked with, as a curator on an exhibit about Ute Indians, and I grabbed a quote from a man who said, and this was long before I knew about Story Center. I grabbed this quote from somebody who said, "I was never alone because I was always with my horse, and his heart was beating too." When I heard that quote, I thought, there is no way in the world I could ever tell that story as historian, as sort of this story keeper of people. It's that story that makes all the difference in the world to me. Hearing those words meant so much more than what I could say about treaties and treaties being broken. So that to me is what these stories are about. It's about people coming in and expressing what I could never in a million years say because I didn't live it myself. Rocky, did you have anything to add?
Just to say that our notes are remarkably similar, and I
Mm.
appreciate you for your labor. I also agree that the complete communication shutdown is the risk, and sending people into silos where projects are starting to splinter and we're not seeing a cohesive move in one direction or the other. And that is obviously damaging for progress. It's difficult for progress to happen in that kind of environment. And I just want to share some words of wisdom that come through me from my inherent family, my original family, and my chosen. My original family says the proof is in the pudding. And I believe that showing people the full track of where their story goes and what impact it creates will help people to further engage in this. But if we don't do that, we will drive them into silos and communication shut down. And the other thing that my chosen family has taught me is there's nothing about us without us, meaning that not only are people requesting to be brought into these spaces, but they're requesting to have even deeper connection to the leadership, structure, strategy, and overall management of these projects as they grow to create a more authentic storytelling experience. And so I just really want to echo that being a person that can step up and bring the opportunity and then step back and allow the stories to come through is a huge factor in making sure that people feel heard and that they see their impacts every single time. And I just really appreciate the space and learning about your projects.
Thank you. I appreciate your input so much. It's really valuable.
Well, thank you both, Rocky and Marianne, for being with us today. and sharing your thoughts and knowledge to humanize the narrative and share best practices for telling the whole story. It's been wonderful to hear from both of you.
It's been great being here. Thank you.
Before we wrap up, a huge thank you again to our ASL interpreters and AI Media for today's ASL interpretation and captioning. And I hope everyone learned a lot. I know I did. So thank you again.
Thank you.